Hello, everyone. My name is Jack Dartford. I work across, as I just said, virtual production, immersive, interactive, themed entertainment, anything that has screens, lighting, that sort of general stuff. It's actually really funny being stood on this stage here, because I used to go to university here some 6 odd years ago, I think. And in the building just over there, Phil and I, who is walking away from the camera, we're actually starting to design what is now this, which is kind of fun. That was a good time. So I'm just going to kind of give you an overview of what I do with a bit more detail, like a show reel I can show you. The show reel does contain flashing images, just as a heads up. Yeah. So a bit of what I do, how I got to do what I do, my kind of journey, some of the challenges that I've had along the way, and kind of what I'm up to now, I guess. Yeah, so background, I think, how far back do you want to go sort of thing. I've always had an interest as sort of like a child in theme parks, live shows like pantomimes, theatre, particularly pertaining to how you can enter a space and it feels like a world that you've never been to before. It's completely abstract. It's something completely different. Universal Studios, you step into a world that's nothing like the world you're used to, and you're fully immersed in that. And I think as a child, you're so, that is completely encompassing. And growing up, I've always wanted to kind of recreate that feeling for other people in whatever industry that may be. And so kind of, growing up, understanding engineering, lighting, video, and, these are the terms for what, when I was a child, made me feel the way I felt. And those are the industries that I knew I wanted to get into because, as I say, those feelings are they're just great. So some of this is, the bottom right is Studio One. Top left is, honestly, it's here, but I can't place where it is here. Top right one is where we are currently. And the middle top one was a final major project from my year group here at ALT, where I did some video for that as well, and, bottom to the left as well. When I was here, I studied live event production, so lighting, video, audio, all that kind of general stuff. I always gravitated towards video and lighting design, which was sort of the trajectory that I wanted to set myself up on. Sadly, just as I got a big break into the lighting world, COVID came along and completely eviscerated anything that I could be doing in that live sort of space. While I was at university, one of my final sort of papers, thesis, projects, whatever, was to do with Unreal Engine and how you can expand an event capacity space into something more than what it is. So say this venue can hold 100 people. If you mocap the talent, stream all the lighting and audio data to a cloud server somewhere else, running a version of Unreal Engine that has essentially a duplicate of where you are stood currently, or, then you can virtualize that production and you can expand your event capacity, through like VR or a video game or something like that, that's kind of trying to replicate with an extra creative flair the performance that's actually happening in a venue. And so I did that for a while, and I think just towards the end of university, I got the pleasure of working on the Al Wasl Dome, which is the dome-shaped objects on the screen, creating just some cloud content for that, for the World Expo in Dubai in 2020. Again, it was nothing crazy. It was just some small pieces of content here and there, but it was a great first introduction to large-scale video systems, content creation, and what will eventually become the career that I'm doing now, I guess. So fast forward after the Al Wasl Dome, like 6 months, 7 months, I was about to leave university and didn't really know where to pivot myself because COVID was still very much a thing and live events were still struggling. My dream was always to be going on tour, doing lighting, video design. That was where I wanted to be. Or working in sort of VFX, themed entertainment, something that can kind of, make people feel more than what they're used to, if that makes sense. And I got a phone call, and it was from the same company that hired me to do the Al Wasl Dome, and they were like, oh, we have this production, it's called House of Dragon. We hear you've used Unreal a few times. Can you just come to Warner Brothers and help us do the virtual production for it? And naturally, I was like, yes, absolutely. Why would I say no to that? After all, I'd done it in my dorm room twice, and so I felt completely yeah, I can do that. Got there and very quickly realized it was a lot more challenging than I originally kind of envisioned. The networking behind it, the video processing behind it is just absolutely phenomenal. And I think it took a very long time for me to properly grasp and understand how all of that tech sort of works, I guess. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I've kind of just dove straight into it out of university, into film and TV, and then onto like Coachella and stuff like that, which was kind of crazy. All doing stuff that is just generally complicated, like augmented reality, large scale virtual production, integrating with all different kind of lighting systems, rigging systems and stuff like that, having to make custom software, hardware. It's been fun. And I think like, to answer this question, I don't do one thing. I do like a multitude of different things. So like, typically I'm known as like a virtual production supervisor, but really I'm kind of a guy that just kind of does stuff. Like I can operate Unreal, I can technically direct Unreal, I can supervise, I can operate lighting, I can run media servers, I can do any of that sort of stuff, software develop. And so like the thing for me is what I'm actually doing is I'm just trying to make people feel something special, whether that is doing supervising or Unreal operating or writing software. My goal is always kind of giving somebody an experience or a memory that they won't forget through whatever whatever means necessary, really. And I think it's been interesting seeing the progression, especially of virtual production from where it was in 2020 to where it is now. I think 2020 I was with the company Lux Machina for like 3 and a bit years before they sadly closed their doors. And that was really interesting because I joined that company just when they came back from The Mandalorian. And that was when the hype was huge. Everything was who's got the biggest LED stage. And I had the pleasure of visiting a lot of those massive stages and using them. I think something that started to happen is people would split LED volumes off. So like you could instead of rent the whole thing for a day, you could rent half the thing for a day and power half of it and get the amount of crew that you would need for that, which helped a little bit. But ultimately, I think the place where it is going or is landing now is the best case scenario. Like volumes of this size, I think are great because you can kind of cater to most needs of small to medium productions. Even large productions, as I say, it's really rare nowadays that you have a production that wants to do everything fully virtual production. If all we want is to, for example, on House of Dragon, they had shot something in Spain and they needed to reshoot that again. Obviously, they can't fly the whole crew back out to Spain just to shoot 2 pickups. What's the point in that? It's just really expensive. They were already renting the LED volume, and so the solution that they kind of came up with was, well, we have the VFX reference pictures from site, so we'll just throw those up on the screen, put the correct color transform on, and reshoot the scene. And they did, and it was great. And I think that's an amazing use case for it. And so this size stage would be great for that. You could even do some car stuff in here, maybe, if you do a bit of a reconfiguration. But I think this size volume and maybe a bit bigger, like this times 2, I think are definitely good sizes for fixed volumes. There are exceptions to that, but we can get back to that in a minute. The way that it's kind of going, that I've seen in the 2 years of probably being freelance and not being with a company, is pop-up stages where, a production comes to you and they say, hey, we think we need virtual production, but we don't really know where or how much. Can you just help us? Instead of saying, here's one stage that does everything, let's make here's some LED that we can reconfigure week after week to what fits your needs. There's no point spending all this money on LED that you're just never going to use. And so a lot of that is, you'll do a script breakdown, understand what they actually need, what is good for virtual production, what is not good for virtual production. Take that, build the LED wall that matches that, and then you can kind of just shoot on it. That gets the easiest case. The easiest kind of case for that is car shoots, because that is typically the same shape LED every time and the same sort of size every time, unless they want to do some crazy camera angles, but that's kind of unlikely. If you're doing a script breakdown, what environment do you need? How does it actually work? How does it function? What shots you use? What camera you're using? What is your lens? Because that can heavily dictate what size screen you need. I think that's where the large-scale volumes were good, in a sense, is you could kind of throw anything at it, and it would probably work most of the time. I definitely see convergences between live and virtual production. There's been a few tours now that are asking me questions about, can we take this technology, like Unreal Engine, whatever, and put it on festivals, concerts, and stuff like that. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the experience that I've had virtual production-wise. Live-wise has definitely been, I'm definitely sit on the more video side of stuff. I can sort of talk about League of Legends a little bit here. League of Legends was a massive challenge because I don't play the game, but I feel like I have after having to work that gig. There's so much nuance in that game and so many triggers that happens while you play it. It's just kind of hard to keep track of. The challenge for this was, well, it's two teams that sit opposite each other usually. They each have a score. They each get kill counts, and there's different things that can happen throughout the game. And they want to trigger the lighting and the video, and I think some pyro as well. And it's like, well, how do you do that? They actually have a whole backend that deals with that. But when I was at Lux, we had to get a software developer in that would help us out with that. But the stuff that I love doing is really fusing all of this stuff together, taking data from anywhere and anyone and just making something that's kind of quite special, I guess. And I think another great example of that is my art installation was for Mental Health Awareness Week a couple of years ago now, which is in the top middle there. It's just a massive particle simulation, but based on the amount of people in the space, it would become more agitated. The whole piece was about social anxiety. Yeah, so it's all kind of, I guess what I'm trying to get to is all of this stuff merges together in a way, and all you're really doing is just passing data around to make something kind of interesting.
So one question I've got is, seems like such a fascinating area and career to be in.
Yeah.
And it seems like you're wearing lots of hats.
Yeah.
You're doing the technology, the art. Where do you need? For example, it sounds like you're a polymath and you can do it all. But say you're not. Say maybe you're really good at technology, but maybe you don't have that artistic eye. Is it possible to get into this area with that? Can you be stronger in certain areas than others, or is?
Oh yeah, like virtual production, live events, any of that stuff, as we all know, live events have content that gets made. There's whole teams of artists that make that stuff that don't really know anything about the tech. That very much exists separately as the tech. There's also virtual production, I think, is very much same but different in the sense that you have people that only do content and literally have no idea about the tech at all. And then you have people that only do tech and don't really know anything about content at all. So it's very much very split. I feel like live is a bit more, you make content, but you kind of make it in a system that has to go to a live point anyway, and so you kind of understand how it works, like Nox and stuff like that, Touch Designer. You kind of have to have a bit of an understanding of how that translates and what you need to do to make it translate correctly. Virtual production there's 3 parts to it, but they're all very separated. The first part is you make the content then goes to the stage team. The stage team preps it, checks it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, it gets sent back, and there's this whole review process. Ideally, that's happens weeks in advance. But yeah, there's always this third person in the middle that is kind of technical and creative, and so that person is kind of rare to come across, but they do exist. And their job is looking at the art, how it's been created, and saying, you've made this in a way where it is not necessarily, going to work with our system and technology and stuff like that. And sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not fine. Having that skill is great, but also to work in that industry, you don't need to have that skill. You can just make content or you can just do the tech. All of those fields equally is respected, I think, across all industries. Yeah, you don't have to know everything to be able to do it, I don't think.
Cool. And if you were someone who's maybe watching this on the stream or in the room today, who's maybe from a more traditional media production background, has got a company that maybe has just done TV or just done traditional live, is it possible to move into this space? What would be your kind of advice and recommendations for people to take a step into this kind of more convergent media space? I
think you're already in the space. I mean, the space is it exists around you. It's just engaging the right people to do it in a way that makes sense for you, right? I mean, if you have a good creative brief, then if you have the right team of technical people, they can go away and they can understand that brief, the needs, and they can kind of make that support network around you. And as I say, script breakdowns, stuff like that can all be done with those teams and tech teams, and they can help you understand what a virtual production setup might look like for you. I wouldn't necessarily say it's on the burden of the production to kind of know how to do that, but it's more of just sort of, this is not necessarily a new thing anymore. There are definitely people out there that know what they're doing. And so if you do want to step into that industry and kind of take a plunge in you want to do a virtual production car shoot or an Unreal setup or something like that, there are companies that will help you do that.
Hello. You know how you said you're the middle person who's got a creative perspective and a technical perspective?
Yeah.
How have you found navigating between the two different areas?
So, the beginning of my career and even at university, I was always very tech focused. I did a bit of creative stuff, but it was always about fusing the two together. And it was always in my own sort of like ecosystem and, environment. I was never really jumped out of that too much. When I left university onto House of the Dragon and worked with Lux Machina, that was very, very technology focused. I didn't really have much time for the creative stuff anymore, sadly. The art I can still do and still actively do. The issue is being a person that is primarily a tech-focused person. Talking to a creative can be a bit of a challenge. I know what I'm trying to say, but I think it just translates kind of difficult. And I think, kind of difficult, like kind of in a bit of a strange way sometimes. A great example of that was, I think the first shoot I ever supervised was the Chemical Brothers music video, Live Again. And that was literally, I was coming off of another job being like a technical director. So I was very much in that headspace. I got a phone call, "Oh, Jack, we think you should go and do this as a supervisor." And I just kind of said, "Well, I can, but I'm not a very sociable person. And I'm a bit black and white. So are you sure that's a good idea?" And so I went there, did it, and I learned all the lessons, how you should talk to people quite quickly. And it's definitely, at first it's difficult, but it's definitely baptism by fire. You either do it and just keep doing it until it's fine, or you do it once, hate it, and never do it again. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it just depends on how just how you are, I guess.
I'll ask another quick question.
Yeah, go on.
So you've worked with lots of different technologies. Is there a kind of future technology coming up that you've not worked with yet that you're excited to work with? Is there something that you'd want someone to come through the door and say, "Let's do a project with X"? If so, what would that be?
Glasses list 3D displays. Where are they? Why are they not here? I know why they're not here yet, but it'd be cool if that was a thing. That's a bit of a pipe dream. Some would disagree. I think it would definitely happen sooner than we think, but that would definitely change most industries. I mean, live, you could have 3D environment that you see from any angle. Virtual production, you don't need to track anything anymore. Well, no, you wouldn't need to track anything anymore. It just kind of happens. It all kind of, that'd be great. It'd be really good. Of course, the price of the display would be absolutely, insane. But yeah, here we are.
Would you say there's any aspects of working in virtual production that most people oversee that are quite important but more behind the scenes, let's say?
Yeah, actually, you know what? I feel like a lot of the marketing around virtual production is always Unreal operator, artist, supervisor. People spend their whole job making the systems work, and systems designers. I've met some of the most insane, clever people in my career, and they're all system designers. The stuff that they know and the way they work, the way their brains function is just insane. I think that's the most overlooked career path. It's a great career path because once industries share technology all the time. You go on a virtual production stage and you see an E2 server that you've just used on some live show somewhere else. It's all very much the same sort of stuff. I think just talking about VFX pipelines, the conversation that always happens at the start is typically color pipeline. That can always be a sticky conversation. Not necessarily. I think I always go for ACES CG. I think, again, having a conversation with VFX before you get to set is great and sometimes can happen, but I find typically in the more short-form productions or as a freelancer where you go in for a week and then disappear again, you don't really have the luxury of being a part of those conversations. It's a lot more, you turn up sometimes with the team, sometimes on your own. You kind of deal with what you have and have to kind of make the most of what you're kind of given, I guess. And in that sense, you never really see it to post. I think early on in my career where I was involved with, consistently involved with much larger productions, you do see it through from months in advance, straight through the whole production. You pre-light, you shoot, pre-light, shoot, pre-light, shoot. But before pre-light, you typically would have, on House of Dragon, we had a month with content testing, which is, you never see that anywhere anymore. I mean, I was on a big production in December, and we got 3 weeks of testing which was like an absolute luxury.
A couple of questions from Olive here. So the first question they're asking is there an advantage in this multiple skilled space of coming more from a games background or a film background, or the opposite, or something different?
I feel like if you want to get into virtual production, games is a good one. Because I feel like if you know games and you work with Unreal or Unity, especially if you work with Unreal, obviously, a career path in artistry is pretty, like, you can, I think, quite easily get into that if you come from games. I think as well, if you are a games programmer or games developer, you'd also sit well on like a plugin development team for a virtual production shoot, maybe if it's big enough that requires that, or just an operator. I think if you come from games, it's a good path for artistry and operating and eventually supervising, I think. Obviously, if you come from film, virtual production kind of makes sense. It all kind of fits together. Live is an interesting one. I know a lot of people that got into virtual production that retired from live into virtual production. The technology is, virtual production technology is pretty much built on the same technology that we all use for live events. So if you're a systems designer or system architect for a touring show, the likelihood is you'd walk into a virtual production stage, might be different boxes with different labels on, but you'd probably be able to get used to how it works. The only sort of abstract stuff will probably be rendering pipelines and the kind of specific rendering hardware that you need for that. But apart from that, I feel like that's quite a transferable, place to come from, live or games.
And I think we've probably got time for one more question just before we finish up. Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to ask a question? Here you go.
Obviously, you do a lot of stuff, and sort of the spice of life and variety is important, but have you got a favourite type of project to say, just in general? Do you like the more entertainment from live events or virtual production, and do you like it being a bigger production or the smaller production where you can, get more on?
I think if I were to rate like industries, I would say live is great for that sort of immediate audience feedback, and that is just a fun atmosphere in general. Film is great, and it really tickles that sort of technological itch for me of like real precise scientific, software development, render pipelines, networking, just really kind of get into it and kind of, I don't know, just have a great time. So I kind of like it for the more tech side of stuff. Immersive I like a lot because it's a blend of all of that stuff. And sometimes it's a real challenge. Sometimes you get a job in the door and it's like, we're going to do this. We have no idea how, but here you go. And then it's your job to kind of work out the best route to do that. And I think I find myself, I'm doing more and more immersive work now. And I think it's just really fun because you get to give people those experiences using technology from live, virtual production, all that sort of stuff. It's a good time.
Nice, thank you.
Brilliant. Any one last question, or should we bring it to a close?